Mr. Arsjad Rasjid, thank you for making time
Thank you.
to talk to the Manila Times, and we're glad to see you back in Manila so soon from your previous trip. Of course, you're here because Indonesia is chairing ASEAN, and you are chairman
right.
of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council.
That's right. That's right.
I noticed, sir, that you're quite interested in doing some work in promoting micro, small, and medium enterprises. In fact, you just finished a meeting with Mr. Joey Concepcion of Go Negosyo. Could you tell us what you want to do as chair for the MSMEs?
First of all, thank you very much, Chair Dante. And basically, yes, this is my actually second visit to the Philippines. And we are on this roadshow of ASEAN. So since I became so I'm the chairman of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Indonesia. And as you put rightly, as to this year is Indonesia chairing the ASEAN. So on the business side, I'm chairing the ASEAN Business Advisory Councils. And on this roadshow, we are trying to visit every country of ASEAN and to understand from the perspective of each of the ASEAN, from the business perspective and also from the stakeholders, to understand what do they want, about ASEAN.
Right.
Okay. And when you say about micro, small, medium enterprises, I think that is the heart of ASEAN. Maybe sometimes we have to put Singapore out of that, right?
Right.
Of
It's the outlier.
Outliers, But nevertheless,
Yes.
Still the foundation of our economy is actually micro, small, medium enterprises. And if you look at say in Indonesia, 67% actually the Indonesian economy is contributed by micro, small, medium enterprises. And the same as in the Philippines.
Quite big here as well.
Very big. Yeah, I think it's in the 80s or 70s.
Well, it's 99.6% of the companies are MSMEs, and they contribute something like 30%
30%,
to
is
the
it?
GDP. Yeah.
So Indonesia to about 67% that contribute to GDP, and actually more than 90% contributes to jobs.
Yeah, ours is about 60%.
60%. Okay. So at the end of the day, it is the foundation
Yes.
of our economy. And with that, that's why we have this 5 priorities that we introduce to the ASEAN conversation.
Okay.
Right? So, and 3 of those actually is a conversation that we had during the G20 and the B20.
Okay.
Right? But then, so basically, number 1 is digital transformation.
Okay.
And the second one is health resilience. Okay. The third is sustainable development, right? And this is the conversation in G20. So we want to bring this conversation to ASEAN. And then we add 2 more, which is food security. And last but not least is trade and investment facilitations.
I noticed the last time you were here, you did an interview with ANC, and you were talking about connectivity.
Yes.
Wiki entrepreneur. What is that about?
Okay. So basically, from these 5 priorities, we have 8 legacies.
Okay.
These 8 legacies, that is from the digital transformation, we have 3 legacies.
Okay.
One of them is what we call wiki entrepreneurship.
Yes.
And then we have also the ASEAN QR code.
Yes.
And another one is actually the, we call it the marketplace of digital lending, right? Basically, in a way, for the wiki entrepreneurship, is how we want to connect the small, medium enterprises in ASEAN.
I see.
So that, the theme of ASEAN for this year is ASEAN Matters, the epicentrum of growth.
Right.
So we look at the epicentrum of growth and say, how do we translate that for the business? So then we have a theme for the ASEAN business, is ASEAN centrality.
Right.
Innovating for a greater inclusivity, right? So the inclusivity, it means that we cannot leave anybody behind. That's mean in business, right? Micro, small, all of this are, we have
at the same time.
Yeah, it has to be inclusive for all of them, right? Yeah. And then centrality, how we connect to each other, right? So this actually represent this connectivity, right? So what we have done on this so-called wiki entrepreneurship is also a legacy that we have introduced during the G20,
I see.
B20. Right? At that point of time, we did a pilot project.
Okay.
So of course, the wiki entrepreneurship in Indonesia, we are already moving forward. Then we say, okay, we should connect this to the G20 countries. So we did with Japan.
I see.
Okay, so that is the wiki entrepreneurship in Japanese. Okay, then and the thing is,
I see. Okay.
all right. So now we want to have this connectivity in ASEAN, right?
So the QR code, when you scan it, is that going to be translating?
No. So let's on the wiki entrepreneurship first. So take the example of this, for example, there is a medium-sized, let's say mid-sized company or large corporation in Japan, for example. Let's say doing a furniture. They are very good,
Okay.
quality-wise, design, and all
Right.
these things, right? So what we are trying to do is, to connect them with the so-called suppliers,
I
right?
see.
So in Japan, you will not be able to produce too expensive, and
Right.
demographically, mostly are seniors, so you need
That's
to have.
right.
So then we connect to the small, medium enterprises in Indonesia, as an example.
I see.
Then what happened is, but we are not only doing connectivity of that, the demand and the supply, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the big guys of this company will be able to mentor the
Right.
process for the small or medium enterprises in Indonesia.
Fantastic.
Right? So they will be giving, okay, this is the right way to do it.
Please think about our furniture manufacturers in Cebu.
yes. So this is why we want to have this conversation.
I see.
Not only in Indonesia, Japan,
But throughout
ASEAN, and how ASEAN be connected with our direct partners. One of them is Japan,
Right.
China, US, and all.
Right.
So that's the idea. Okay. Whereby on the ASEAN QR code is actually for the payment.
I see. For the payment system.
For the payment system. So
Okay.
what we're trying to do is this, right? Indonesia and Thailand is already connected now. So with QR code, with a phone, we can just pay.
I see.
Right? And what we're trying to do, why don't we do it all within ASEAN?
Right.
If we can do it all multilateral, we can do it bilateral first. But then, if eventually, the most important is how to create the standards. And we can have international standards of QR code, right?
Right.
And so what we're trying to do, as an example, so what we are doing is this. By having this ASEAN QR code payment, right?
Yeah.
This is particularly also for micro, small, medium enterprises, right? Why? Number one, it actually reduces the transaction fee.
Sure.
Usually, as much as 200 business points, right?
Okay.
2%, right?
Right.
If we can actually save that for micro, small, medium,
That can be a big thing.
A big thing, right?
So I know you talked to the First Lady, you talked to I think some secretaries, and
Yes.
you've talked to some of our big businessmen. Are
Yes.
you very close to
Oh,
doing
yes.
that QR code with the Philippines now?
Yes,
Are you
yes.
signing something, or what's going to happen?
No, we are pushing. So we are working together with our central bank, right?
I see. So it's a government.
So it has to both.
Yeah.
That's why it's like co-driving.
I see.
This is where we want to say, in Indonesia, we call it Indonesian Incorporated,
I
where
see.
the government and the private sectors can work together.
Right.
And so we say, why don't we use this model in ASEAN too, right? So the central bank and us, let's say, we work together. So we push on the business for the execution.
I see.
The policies are by the central banks,
I see.
right?
I see.
So it's actually interconnecting.
I
So
see.
that while they have discussion, we also push the private sectors to actually connect between the private sectors here and there. On the, let's say, as an example, what is one of the largest, let's say, payment in the Philippines that we met actually, where they now be going to be connected with our system in Indonesia,
I see.
right? We'll introduce them to the companies in Indonesia
Okay.
that does the payments, right?
I see.
Then they can do this interconnectivity.
I see.
Right.
Is that something we can see this year or next
yes.
year?
Oh,
or
yes.
what's
Oh,
the
yeah.
timetable for that?
What our aim is, there will be a ASEAN leaders meeting
I see.
twice this year.
Okay.
Right? The first one will be in May.
Okay.
The second one will be in September.
Okay. Then the
So,
main one, yeah.
So no, hopefully by September.
Okay.
Okay, by September we can see that, for example, Indonesia, Philippines, with Thailand, with Vietnam, or with Malaysia,
Right.
Singapore, at least these 5 countries.
Right.
But we opened up to also, because when I had actually a discussion with just last week, the Asian Business Advisory Council had a 1-hour discussion with all the senior economic ministers in Magelang, Indonesia. So what we actually spoke to all of them. And for example, a minister from Laos says, hey, we want to do this too, quickly. Okay, So, we are very open.
I see.
And this actually create a connectivity, right, between our small, medium enterprises, right, or even the micros, right?
Right.
So that then, have this, what we call the centrality.
Yes.
We've been talking about centrality in ASEAN for many
For a
years.
long time, yeah.
Since inception, perhaps,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
But it's more the approach of the government. So it's
Okay.
time for people-to-people approach, which is then business-to-business approach.
Right,
So
right.
that's where we are trying to
Are you worried about some of the headwinds that ASEAN is facing? I know in the Philippines, people here are cautiously optimistic because things are clicking, domestically. But they say that many of our problems are coming from abroad: inflation, volatile fuel prices, even the logistical problems for all commodities. What are you keeping an eye on?
I think you put rightly in your words, saying cautious.
Okay,
Yeah, cautious,
yeah.
right? But optimistic.
Yes.
I think that's what we have to be.
Okay.
Okay, in recession could happen if
Yeah.
your mind, all of us are saying recession.
Okay.
And
It's self-fulfilling.
So
Yes.
it's self-fulfilling, and
Yeah.
there will be no supply demand. There will
Yes.
be no transaction, right?
Yes.
People are afraid, right?
Yeah.
We shouldn't be afraid. Why?
Okay.
That we shouldn't be afraid. As you mentioned also just now, we do not really depend a lot to the economy of the world. Right now, we have our own, right? For example, Indonesia, 55% is all of domestic market. I think same with Philippines. Majority will be based on domestic market. And this is where we have to be more important. You mentioned about the breakdown of the supply chains as an example. So we have to really strengthen
Right.
our regional supply chains.
Right.
We have to strengthen our economy regionally.
Right.
We are talking about ASEAN, we are talking about 700 million people.
Yes.
Right?
Quite a big market.
Very big market. And just looking at Indonesia and Philippines, Indonesia 280 million people. The Philippines more than 100 million people.
That's right.
Combined is what, 400 million people already.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And that's like, more than half of ASEAN already, right?
Right. Right.
You consider Vietnam is 100 million, it's huge, right?
Right.
So we need to make sure also how we can actually trade and invest in ASEAN.
Right.
Rather than, I was mentioning in Singapore, for example, sovereign wealth fund of Singapore.
Right.
I was telling them, it is time. It is time for us, not to just invest outside of ASEAN. Why don't we focus in investing in ASEAN?
Right.
And create more trades within ASEAN?
Right.
Then, as we strengthen our supply chain within regionally, then we can be part of the global supply chains.
Right.
So if we are just a global supply chain without a regional supply chain, it could just break down. That's what had happened during the pandemic, right?
Right.
And all this, of course, the geopolitical situation within Russia and Ukraine and so forth, the trade war between China and the US, right? So we have to think about ourselves.
Yeah. Are you worried about that maybe the geopolitical tensions here in the South China Sea, you mentioned that, China and the US, that, that will disrupt many of the things that you're trying to do to maybe integrate the ASEAN economies?
I think the most important is that we have to be able to work together.
Right.
If we have the spirit of wanting to work together, the stronger we are, right? And then so we have also a voice.
Right.
We need, when I spoke to one Professor Kishore in Singapore, he mentioned to me, I said, what do you think about ASEAN? Right? And he said, Arsjad, ASEAN has been very silent. That's the word, silent.
Yes.
So I think this is the time for us
To make its presence felt.
to say that, hey, we are ASEAN.
Yeah.
We have a voice.
Yes.
In all aspects of this economic development. Right. And it is important, when we started in the G20 as an example, Indonesia is the only ASEAN country and that is in G20.
Yeah, which you hosted last year.
Last year, that's right. We want to make sure that, we are representing ASEAN.
Right.
But not only representing ASEAN, we are representing the developing countries, the voice of developing countries, right? I think now, if you look at on geopolitical situation and look at the whole world today, everyone is looking at ASEAN.
Yeah. So what would that voice say? Because all of the big boys seems to have a hot head. So we say, just stop it. Let's just do business. That's the message.
No. This is one thing that is sometimes forgotten.
Yes.
Right? Is instilling values into an economic development.
That's a very important thing.
So we introduce what we call 5 Ps.
Okay.
Right? Peace, prosperity, people, planet, and to connect all these four is partnership, with the caveat of another two values that we introduce. One is unity in diversity. We can have
Unity
all
and
different,
diversity.
yes, different. We could be different, but we have to be united.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can become stronger.
Right.
And then another values of basically is inclusive collaboration.
Yeah.
Okay, and so with this in mind, in how we think about partnership,
Yeah.
because number one, we have to make sure that we are in peace, right?
Okay.
If there's no peace, there's no economic development,
Right.
right?
Right.
No economic development, there will be no prosperity.
Right.
And we have to think prosperity for who?
Right.
It's for the people.
Right.
So this is the key.
Right.
We cannot leave anybody behind.
Right.
We have to be inclusive,
Right.
and we have to make sure that human capital development
Right.
that is very key factors, right? Then when we have this human capital development, then we all understand that we live in one planet. You know, we know that, right? And we live in this planet called Earth, right? And we all breathe the same air, right? There is no air in the Philippines or Indonesia, in the US or in Europe. It's different. We are the same. And so that's why, we are worried also about climate change. We want to make sure that we have longevity in our life. We want to be healthy.
Yeah.
But the advanced country must also realize that when we actually, the breath of this air, what happened to the air today is through a process of industrial revolution.
Right.
We are on the fourth industrial revolution.
Right.
And at that point of time, in the beginning of industrial revolution, it was powered by carbonization.
I see.
Right?
Yes.
And now we all understand, yes, we have to live with decarbonization to support or energize our development. We take that.
Right.
But with this, but the advanced country must then help us, right? In technology, right? In financing it, right? Because we're all the same. So this is what we want to say,
I see.
So if you ask what would be position, we say yes. Do not forget, You talk about economic development. One another example, there's the Green Deal,
The Green Deal.
2030,
Yes.
for European Union, and they said, okay, all that is going to be imported to the EU must have green products, right? Okay. So, but the question is this, right? For large corporation, may be easy to actually adopt to this Green Deal, right?
It's harder for the...
But for the mid-size, it's struggling. How about very
small?
challenging? Small. And then the question is, why? Are you trying to exclude small businesses to actually supply products to Europe?
Right.
That's not right.
Well, when you talk about ASEAN unity, of course, I mean, there are some fractures we're seeing because of what's going on in Myanmar. There has been some solidarity. I mean, Indonesia's been leading it and calling out the leaders there. What do you think can be done? Is that, are you worried about that when you talk about maybe working together, ASEAN centrality? Of course, when one member is not playing by the rules that everyone's following.
Yeah. But you have we have to be clear.
Okay.
There is the political side, which is mostly the government side.
Right.
There's the people.
Right.
And business is part of these people.
Right.
Right. So we should not disengage. Right. People of Myanmar.
Right.
Right. That's why we are going to Myanmar.
Okay.
Right? It is important for us to keep the interaction, to help them, because at the end of the day, the business must happen to create the prosperity for the people. Right. So we have to really separate politics and people.
Okay.
Right. And so for us, it's about the people.
Okay.
Right. And people in Myanmar needs to have business, needs to create supply and demand, needs to have prosperity. Right. So I think it is unfair if we have to exclude Myanmar from the people perspective. Right. So that's what we have to do.
Right.
We have to interact with them.
Is Indonesia thinking of maybe I don't know, some special interventions while you're chairing ASEAN? Is there something, or maybe a special meeting, or maybe some
From
a special mission to?
I think again they have to separate between the politics
Yeah.
and the
No,
people.
I mean, like, are we thinking about like maybe a trade mission or something? Or
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean that's the thing. We want to continue,
Yeah.
right? How the interaction or the link between the people to people.
Right,
So
right.
trade, we want to increase trades, right? How between people to people,
Right.
right? We have to make sure, for example, on the food,
Yeah.
right, situation. I mean, one of the priority is food security,
Right.
and that we brought into the conversation of ASEAN. And we have to make sure that people in Myanmar also be able to eat, right?
Right.
And the key word is affordability,
Right.
right? And we don't want to have scarcity,
Right.
right? That's what's happening, right? And that's where actually the push of inflation globally because of the high energy costs,
Right.
and also high food costs.
Right.
Those are the two main driver
Right.
that actually raises the inflation all over the world. So we have to maintain, because we have to make sure also, that the social business
Right.
in ASEAN stays.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned climate change, and that's one of your key pillars as chair this year. What are some of the major things that we should be working on, or
Okay.
that you would like people to know?
Yes, number one is this. Number one, that we all have to face the reality that we need to fix this climate change, right? It affected many things. Right? So in this conversation, we have two legacies that we actually brought to the conversations. One is what we call it the ASEAN Net Zero Hub.
Okay.
Okay. The second one is Carbon Center of Excellence.
Okay.
Why these two, right? Number one, let's talk about the Carbon Center of Excellence, right?
Okay.
A country like the Philippines and Indonesia is an example. We have a large area of forests,
Right.
right? And if, then when we talk about carbon trading, we talk about carbon credits, right? You have to start with the value first, right? So, as you know, they call ASEAN as the lung of the world, right? The lungs of the world. And Philippines, Indonesia, and so forth. We are contributing a lot of oxygens
Yes.
to the air of this world, right? And so with that, it is important for us as ASEAN to also be part of the conversation.
I see.
It cannot be just people who wanting to have the carbon credit having those discussion. We are the one who have this, right?
Right. Right.
We should be part of the discussion.
Right.
We should be the one who is also, being part of the discussion, how to measure it, how to standardize it, how to do the carbon trading, and all these things, right? And that's why we want to say, let's do this Carbon Center of Excellence, right? And so we want to have, I know that there's Philippines has not committed to a net zero yet.
Yes.
Right? Indonesia have committed to 2060.
Okay. 2060,
Vietnam
okay.
is 2050
Yes.
in Vietnam, for example. So, but eventually every country will have that, right? So, one on carbon, that many companies in the world will need to have to buy the carbon credit to neutralize the carbon. But on the other side, that's why we have this, what we call the Net Zero Hub, right?
Okay.
What is this? We did first, it was in Indonesia. We call it the KADIN Net Zero Hub, right?
Okay.
That's when after we came back from Glasgow, right?
Okay.
When we came back from Glasgow on COP26, we say we need to create awareness, number one, to all the companies.
Okay.
Not only large, medium, small, all,
Okay.
right? But then more than that, then we need to create a roadmap eventually, right? A roadmap, because this journey of net zero is very challenging. For every sectors, the challenge will be different.
Okay.
For large corporation, mid-sized corporation, or small corporation will be different.
Right.
So you need to have a creation of this roadmap
Okay.
of this going towards net zero.
Okay.
So we thought that it is important to have the conversation not only in Indonesia, but with all our ASEAN.
Right.
So that we can share our knowledge,
Right.
right? And more importantly also, the most important in this journey is what kind of technology.
Okay.
So here we can share various technology for every sectors, perhaps carbon captures, energy efficiencies, and so forth.
I see.
Maybe some Philippine companies doing that perhaps, or they're from Singapore, from somewhere else, Indonesia, right? But we need to find this technology.
Right.
Of course, If there is already from advanced country, good. But I mean, are they selling it too high for
Yeah.
us to adopt?
Out of
first?
reach, yeah.
Yeah. And then financing it.
Yeah.
How do you finance this,
Yeah.
this transition
Yeah.
towards a carbon neutrality journey, right?
Right.
So that's why, and if we are one in this one, and we can tell the world, hey, the way ASEAN is trying to do, we are
Right.
going there,
Right.
but this is our way.
Right. You're in mining. I mean, your business, and when you talk about climate change and these parts of the country being the lungs of the world, right? What are some of the I think responsible practices that we can look at, because in the Philippines it's very controversial. We've had some bad history with mining here, but how can we move forward, because there's a lot of interest now, right?
Oh,
But
yeah.
as you said, we have to be
Yes.
responsible.
You have
and
to
do
create a
yeah.
value added even
Yeah.
for your minerals.
Right.
You shouldn't be just, in our opinion,
Yeah.
should be exporting raw.
Yeah. The ores.
The
yeah.
ores, right?
Yeah.
You should create value added so
Okay.
that small and medium enterprises industry can also be developed, create an
Right.
ecosystems,
Right.
a new ecosystem,
Right.
For example, you have nickels, right?
Yes.
And
And
that,
so do you, yes,
Indonesia,
yeah.
for example, Indonesia and Philippines combined, maybe up to 50% that we supply to the
Of
world.
the world, yeah. Yeah.
And that's a key component for
For
creating
EVs,
battery.
yeah. Yeah.
And battery is a key for
Yeah.
EVs, right? So on the mining side, for example, our company example is Indica Energy.
Yes.
We have committed to a net zero by the year 2050. All right, 2050. And then on this journey that we want to pursue to 2050, we are already moving away from, let's say, coal,
Yeah.
right? And we have coal-fired power plant. And now we put our coal-fired power plant as part of the early retirement on the just energy transition mechanism, right? As an example. And more than that, on the operational side, we look at, for example, the trucks usually, fossil fuel. Now we are changing that.
Yeah.
We are looking at electric trucks in the future for mining. And now, to create more efficiencies, we are applying more the so-called industrial revolution technology or digitalization in our mining, right? And all of this is again because we want to make sure the ESG values, right? So environment is key, and so we all have to be aware of that. And so even on the processing, for example, on the mineral processing, what we are looking at is always continuation of a better technology that going towards zero waste,
Right.
So all of these are I always say as a journey
Right.
for all of us, and it's good for all of us to share and to what we have done wrong in Indonesia, our mistakes, and we want to share with Philippines as an example.
So maybe talking about nickel and mining.
Yes.
That's an exciting.
Yes,
That's
yes.
exciting, as you said. The
Yeah.
Philippines, Indonesia hold much of the. Is there any cooperation between our countries, or any possibilities that you would like to see?
Yeah, of course, of course. When we talk about, when we look at carbon emission, we box it into 3 boxes.
Okay.
One box is power.
Okay.
Second box is transport.
Okay.
The third box of where carbon emission comes is industries.
Okay.
Okay. So we talk about the industry when we talk about the net zero. For example, how is this journey? What kind of technology needed, right?
Okay.
But then you talk about the transport, right? Indonesia has adopted that we want, in order for us to tackle this transportation emission, is with electric vehicles strategy, right? And this electric vehicle strategy, I think, is number 1, you reduce the carbon emission.
Okay.
Number 2, this is in the case of Indonesia. Number 2, we reduce our dependency toward fossil fuel, right? And then that actually enhance also reduce our subsidy. Yeah, but reducing subsidy without jeopardizing the affordability of the people, because the one you reduce is the fossil fuel usage, and so you can actually reduce the subsidy, right?
Okay.
And that can be used for others. And then at the same time, creating ecosystems
Right.
where you create industries there, right? So when the president of Philippines went to Indonesia and met our president,
Right.
President Marcos met with Pak Joko Widodo, and Pak Joko Widodo shared with him
Yes.
about what kind of thing we are doing in Indonesia.
Right.
For example, on the nickels,
Yeah.
how we created the value added.
Yeah.
Last time our trades or our revenue to the government from ore was about 1 billion US dollars. After 7 years, it became 30 billion,
Wow.
right? Then that's real. This is, is a fact, right?
Right.
30 times of multiples, right?
It's fantastic.
It's fantastic. And so we say, we want to share
Right.
our journey.
Right.
And say, of course, we did some mistakes
Of course.
along the way.
Yeah.
So we are saying to, let's say, to president.
So you're sharing that experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so our president say, guys, both from the government and the business, please share.
Yeah.
Share the experiences with Philippines.
Right.
Right?
Well, you were here just last month, and you're here again, and I think you're traveling all over ASEAN, right?
Yes.
What was the purpose for this particular trip? What did you hope to achieve?
Why come back here?
Yeah.
Two things. Number one is the digital transformation. I was mentioning about the
Yes.
QR code.
Yes.
We want to push that to make sure by
Yes.
September we
Okay.
can do that.
Okay.
And because
We'll write something about it. That's quite interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
and so we think that's why we met with the all the so-called payment gateway or payment companies here in Philippines
Right.
to join in to
Right.
interconnect.
Right.
Okay, and then we are also wants to share our experiences
Yes.
in the electrification of vehicles.
I see.
And what we want to share also that we have signed, let's say, MOU with Australia. We can bring in not only for Indonesia but for ASEAN. So particularly on this for Philippines as an example. Why? Because they have other minerals that's needed to make the battery, the lithium as an example, right? So we say, why don't we create this regional supply chains,
Okay.
right? Strengthen ASEAN.
Okay.
Then we can bring in, for example, Thailand. They are very big in automotive. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Malaysia have the protons,
Yes.
and then you have
We get our pickup trucks from
pickup trucks
Thailand. From Thailand,
right?
yeah.
And then even Vietnam
Yes.
is actually now exporting to the US electric
Yes.
vehicles, right?
Yes. Yes.
And Indonesia is actually now our company, for example, my company is actually created two-wheelers electric bike, for example. And then we are also pursuing into trucks, buses, and so
Yeah.
forth, right? Why don't we share? Why don't we do things here?
Yeah.
Why don't we create a complementary values change
Right.
within ASEAN?
Right.
And then bring in Australia, for example, for others, bring in other countries
Right.
also.
But
to
ASEAN
create-
led, right?
ASEAN led.
Yeah.
And then we can be supply chains of the world.
Right.
I was in Saudi Arabia last year during FII,
Mhm.
where Saudi Arabia basically announced that they want to be part of the supply chains, the global supply chains. And I know Saudi Arabia is investing a lot in electric vehicles also. Lucid, for example, right?
Okay.
And so that's like the competitors of for Tesla, example,
Okay.
right? So I
Yes.
say, we spoke to the Saudis and say, Saudis, we have this in Indonesia, ASEAN now.
Yeah.
Why don't we work
Together.
Why not?
Fantastic.
Why not? Right? With Europe, right?
Yeah.
Even with China still, no problem.
Right.
For us, we want to trade with all.
Right.
Right? Because at the end, our goal is to create more jobs.
Right.
And through
And that's how you will that's everybody.
and create prosperity for our
Yeah,
people, right?
yeah.
We want to, we want to make sure our people are prosper.
Right. What opportunities do you see specifically for Indonesia and the Philippines?
Very-
Is there a particular sector that we should be focusing on, or that's ripe for
Number one, for sure, in my opinion, is the digital space.
digital space? Okay.
Because this digital space really, really touches for the micro, small, medium enterprises.
Okay.
And this actually can create a leapfrog,
Okay.
right? And so can give the micro, small, medium enterprises access to a global supply chain.
Okay.
Even for the micro, even small,
Okay.
right? So digital business is one key,
Okay.
right? Another thing that we look at is how can we work on this electric vehicle strategy
I see.
together, right? Why not? Yeah. And then number three, why don't we also work and we share knowledge in, for example, on the food security aspect.
Food security.
Yeah, how we introduce what we call the inclusive closed loop model, right? Which in the Philippines, I think your president or the government just introduced this. This is where it's about large corporation mentoring
That's right.
the
That's
small.
what Mr. Concepcion is doing. Yeah.
Yes, and how then to include not only mentoring but off taking,
Yeah.
right? So that this inclusive close model, right? So that we can, the large or medium corporation can help the small one, right? And that's the value of ASEAN. When you look at every country, how we work together,
Right.
right? So with this, what we're trying to do is to bring up or upgrade the small enterprises, right? Or the micro. We have to make sure the micro upgraded to small, small upgraded to medium, medium upgraded to large, right? That's where I think the working together, right? And so on those food security as an example, is things that perhaps we can work together,
Right.
we can share, and we want to make sure the farmers are taken care of,
Right.
and really become not a worker but an entrepreneur
Right.
for the farmers, smallholders, right? And we can, why not? We work on that too. And then more than that, of the lands of the world, that's something also we can work together, right?
Climate
On
change.
climate change, for example, on the forestry, the regenerative forests.
Right.
Yeah. How do we create reforestation?
Right.
I think we learn from each other, we share knowledge.
Right.
Why not?
Yeah.
So it is a time for us to create this complementary synergy values, particularly for ASEAN, but of course Indonesia and Philippines.
Right. Well, sounds very good. I hope you are successful, and if there's anything we can do, please reach out.
No, please support us. And it's very important for the media, I think,
Yes.
because you are the voice.
Yes.
So we need to be heard by all.
Right.
And then this is where in Bahasa we call it gotong royong, where it's actually inclusive collaboration. This is how all of us, large, medium, small enterprises, we work together, and how ASEAN, in Indonesia, Philippines, and us work together. And so with this spirit, I do believe, we can create prosperity for the people.
All right. Well, with that, thank you very much. Terima
Thank you,
kasih.
sir. Thank you.
Sampai jumpa lagi.
Salamat.
Okay.
Salamat.